So we're right in the middle of the Rugby World Cup and support for the Bokke is at an all-time high. But the next clash on Sunday night against France might happen without the anthem or the official display of our flag. In fact, this will impact us at the Cricket World Cup as well. And that's because South Africa has failed to update anti-doping legislation as required by the World Anti-Doping Association. This apparently was flagged last October, but has as yet not been fixed. Now South Africa has filed an appeal at the Court of Arbitration for Sports in Switzerland to make sure we can keep flying the flag at these tournaments. Let's bring in Khalid Gallant, CEO of the SA Institute for Drug-Free Sport. Mr. Gallant, thank you so much for joining us. Has South Africa filed that appeal as yet?
Good evening. Yes, we filed the notice of intent to dispute, which in other words is an appeal. We filed that today, so WADA would have received our intent to challenge the non-compliance declaration. It is afternoon now in Montreal, so they would have received it, and we expect to receive a reply on our letter of appeal or intent to dispute within the next few days from WADA. But what that means is the fact that we filed the letter today before the deadline of the 13th of October is that the consequences of non-compliance is now stayed, and the issue of the flag being flying is no longer an issue. So the official flying of the flag during the Sunday quarterfinals and during the Cricket World Cup now will not be affected, and it will continue as normal.
All right, so that crisis has been averted because that appeal has been lodged. We can continue as we have been. That is really great news. I think there's still questions that remain, though, because my understanding is that this problem in our legislation was flagged by WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Association, a year ago. Why has it not been fixed?
Correct. The legislative process in South Africa doesn't move as fast as WADA wanted us to move. They wanted us to promulgate and adopt legislation within 3 months. That was not possible. But during that time, we have gained a lot of ground. And in the letter of appeal today to WADA, government has pledged that no later than April 2024, this legislation will be passed. So we're hoping that WADA will accept the commitment from government and rescind the consequences of non-compliance, so we don't have to move to the Court of Arbitration to rule on this dispute.
So what actually is wrong with our current legislation? What exactly doesn't fit in with the WADA rules?
Well, South Africa was a pioneer in anti-doping, so this legislation was adopted in 1997. The World Anti-Doping Code only came into effect in 2001, and there's been various iterations over the number of years. So in the last 2 years, WADA samples a group of countries and does an audit of the legislation. We were in that audit, and we were one of 2 countries in the 2-year cycle that was identified as having outdated legislation.
Yeah, so what's wrong with our legislation? I mean, it sounds like we were on the front foot. There's nothing in our legislation that would say we're pro-doping. So what exactly is wrong with our legislation?
Well, it's wrong. I mean, you took in 1997, the definitions of what doping is has changed. What a positive test is has all evolved over the years. And what we now refer to as non-analytical positive, where we can do investigations. Also, the jurisdiction and tasks that we are required to do has also changed. So that is what needs to be updated in the legislation.
Okay, so essentially it's a bit outdated. I get that. Is it a lot that has to change, or is it just a little clause that could be done quite quickly?
No, it's actually a few clauses, so it can't be done fairly quickly. Though WADA has now accepted the changes, we've sent it to the state law advisor just for final review, and all the changes that were required have been done. So now it's just to pass the hurdle of it getting promulgated through Parliament.
All right, so this Court of Arbitration for Sport, your appeal went through today. That means we don't have anything in terms of worrying about our anthem not being played or our flag not being flown at any of these international tournaments. But talk to me about this Court of Arbitration process. I mean, could it be fairly simple and fairly quick? Could we see WADA going, OK, fair enough, guys, no problem, fix it by April 2024, we're good to go? How soon will we know what happens next?
Well, we're obviously hoping for, as you just said, that WADA is satisfied with the commitment from government and the commitment to promulgate the legislation by April 2024, and that we don't have to go the route of the Court of Arbitration in sport. But we will, WADA normally will respond within 10 working days, so we hope to get a response within the next few days to our letter that we sent off today.
Are you a bit disappointed that the South African government didn't move a little quicker on this?
It's not about disappointment, it's about respecting the legislative process. Yes, I would have loved it to move faster, but again, as a non-governmental entity, I don't have control of how the process moves in terms of the state law review. It has to be reviewed by National Treasury and then go through the two houses of Parliament. So it's not about being disappointed, but just being cognizant of the different processes that have to be followed.
So you mentioned that different countries are audited by WADA at different times. Obviously, they take time to go through the different countries' legislation. And in this particular batch, South Africa was one of two countries that was flagged. Has any other country ever had a situation where they've actually not been able to play their anthem, not been able to display their flag for exactly the same problem?
Consequences vary from depending on what the non-compliance matter is, but there's been numerous other countries over the years that have been declared non-compliant. France, Spain, Argentina, Kenya came very close to being declared non-compliant before the Rio Olympics. Currently, Gabon is non-compliant in Africa, and Nigeria also was able to avoid it 2 years ago with the quick passing of legislation through their parliament. So there are other countries that have experienced issues of non-compliance. Obviously, the case of Russia being the most egregious, and that's where the consequences was very serious in terms of singing of the anthem and wearing of the uniforms. They were not even allowed to wear the uniforms, and they had to compete as neutral athletes, and they were also banned from international events. Those type of consequences do not apply to South Africa.
Mm-hmm. I just want to ask, bearing in mind that this was flagged in October last year, why did you have to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport rather than simply appealing to WADA and saying, look, guys, this is the lengthy, difficult process that we go through to try and change our laws. All the T's have to be crossed, all the I's have to be dotted. Can we please just have a bit of an extension? Was that not tried?
Oh, that was definitely tried, and we had intense negotiations and back and forth from WADA, but they were pretty rigid and not flexible in their negotiations and discussions with understanding the legislative process in South Africa.
So what are their options now regarding what's happening with the court? Could they just fight it and say, no, we gave them enough time?
Well, yes, we now have, it's what we refer to as a dispute. So WADA has their position. We have identified various grounds for appeal, which we are contesting, that the burden of proof will be on WADA to prove that. And the Court of Arbitration ultimately will adjudicate and rule on the matter, and may throw out the consequences or may keep the consequences and agree with WADA. But that process will evolve over the next few months if we do go to arbitration through the Court of Arbitration in Sport in Switzerland.
All right, and we should, as you say here, within 10 days, if that process is going to go forward or if there's some sort of last-minute settlement agreement. But for now, our flag will fly, our anthem will play at our international sports events. Thank you so much, Khalid Gallant. He's CEO of the SA Institute for Drug-Free Sport.